I know what you're thinking. This comparison doesn't make any sense. The Toyota Prado Kakadu is almost twice the price of the GWM Tank 300. And you're right, it is. That's also not really the point. You see, GWM wants off-road SUV buyers to buy a tank. But what the sales figures overwhelmingly say is that what off-road SUV buyers actually want is one of these. So, is the tank just an attractive price tag, or can it actually stack up in any way to Australia's favourite? Before we get into it, please like the video, subscribe to the Car Sales channel, and give us your thoughts in the comments below. As mentioned at the top, these two aren't competitors on price. The GWM Tank 300 Ultra Petrol we have here is a tick over $50,000 drive away, while the Prado Kakadu is almost $90,000 before on-road costs. You can bet that number will increase when the all-new generation lands next year. Where the two are quite similar is in terms of size. The Prado is about 200mm longer, though a bit less if you don't have the spare wheel on the back like our test car, but in terms of height, width and wheelbase, there's only a couple of centimetres in it. Where the two diverge once again is under the bonnet. The Prado has a 2.8 litre turbo diesel, the Tank has a 2 litre turbo petrol. So the Tank's got more power, but the Prado's got more torque and it's more economical. You can get a hybrid tank, which is a very weird thing to say, which is both more powerful and more efficient, but it's also an extra 10 grand. Warranty and servicing is much of a muchness. GWM covers the tank for 7 years, whereas Toyota offers a 5-year warranty on most of the Prado, but 7 years on the engine and driveline. The Prado is also a little cheaper to service, but does require attention every 6 months. Alright, I'll start on the Prado, but I'm not going to spend too long on it, as obviously it's all going to change radically when the new generation arrives next year. And not a moment too soon really, as it feels every day of its 2009 vintage in here. It actually got a decent refresh in 2017, and unlike the Nissan Patrol, Toyota has at least kept the infotainment relatively current, so there's smartphone mirroring and the like, but there's just a million buttons in here. It's like they had a game to try and hide them all. I've got seat controls here on the door, I've got lights down here, parking assist down here, we've got heated seats and drive controls and four-wheel drive controls and fans here. It's just, they're everywhere. There isn't much in the way of storage, but there is plenty of equipment, including heated and ventilated seats, a moonroof, electrically adjustable steering column, triple zone climate control, a 14-speaker stereo and a sizable fridge in the center console. Here in the back I've got heaps of space, each side slides and reclines. Outboard seats are heated, we've got ISOFIX points both sides, got HDMI and 12-volt input, separate temperature controls are always nice. And if you go for the Kakadu, you also get this rear entertainment package, so hopefully you've kept your Blu-rays. A couple of weird omissions though, no sunblinds and there's no USB ports either. The Prado is unique among these two in offering a third row. To match that, you'll need the larger Tank 500, which is still unconfirmed for Australia, though looking pretty likely. This is a real benefit of the Prado, and it's one of the better third rows I've tried. I had to move the second row forward slightly, and it's not super easy to get in and out because it can only really happen on the passenger side, but plenty of leg room, heaps of shoulder room, headroom's good. I've got lights, I've got air vents, cup holder, it's good. One unique feature of the Prado Kakadu is this electrically operated third row, which sounds great, but isn't so flash in practice. See, it's operated by these buttons here, but God, they're so slow. You can put them up and down manually about 10 times in the time it takes it to actually fold away. Anyway, once they're finally folded, the boot itself is massive. We've got tie-down points, 220-volt outlet, and you can lock the tailgate open so it doesn't blow close in the wind, which is a very handy feature, and it's not particularly light. Another thing to mention is if you option the flat tailgate like this car, and move the spare wheel from the tailgate to under the floor, the fuel capacity shrinks from 150 litres to just 87. Something to keep in mind if you need plenty of touring range. Now for the tank, and it couldn't be any more different than the Prado. Obviously it's much more modern in here with the giant widescreen displays, but it's also laid out in a much more contemporary manner. Whereas in the Prado there are buttons here, there and everywhere. Everything's nicely grouped in this, and there are still plenty of hard keys for the heated seats, fan speed, temperature control, so it's been nicely thought out. And the design. Now it's not really up to me to say whether it's good or bad. You can look at it and make your own mind up, but what I like is that GWM has taken a few chances and decided to incorporate a bit of flair in terms of its shapes and materials. As such, maybe it won't be for everyone, but nor is it just a sea of boring grey plastic in here. Got these Mercedes style air vents, this transformer style gear lever, plenty of leather surfaces too here, and soft touch on the dash. If you go for this Ultra variant, it's also stacked with kit. Heated and ventilated front seats, driver's side with memory and massage, heated steering wheel, wireless charging, air-conditioned centre console, dual-zone climate control and a sunroof. There is no native sat-nav though, only Google Maps, which is fine as long as you have reception. It's not quite so flash here in the back, no separate temperature controls, no heated seats, but I do have air vents, a pair of USB ports and plenty of space. Isofix points on both sides, and both cars actually have really nice large windows. A small thing, but it does make life a bit more pleasant for both driver and passenger. When examining the boot of the Tank 300, you suspect the development team had a pretty good look at the Prado, which makes absolute sense. We've got the same side hinge tailgate, which can be locked open. We've got 220 volt outlet in here, plenty of tie down points. But where the Tank does struggle a bit is in terms of volume. The fact that it's got virtually no rear overhang is great for off-roading, but the compromise is less luggage space. Helpfully, the rear seats can be folded flat, so if you need to go camping, it could double as a bed, and that might come in very handy. The reason I say that is to do with towing. Now there's going to be some facts and figures here, but stay with me because it's really important, especially as both these things are going to be bought with the intention of towing boats or caravans. The Prado isn't too bad. It's rated to tow a maximum of 3,000 kilograms, but if you do so, the payload is just 400 kilos, and that's with the flat tailgate, which is 60 kilograms lighter. That's 400 kilograms for passengers, luggage, the lot. Not amazing, but at least it's enough to give you some flexibility. The Tank, on the other hand, is rated to tow a maximum of 2,500 kilograms, but if you do so, the payload is just 147 kilograms. So if you hook up a 2.5 ton caravan to the back of the Tank, there's a good chance that mum and dad can't even legally come along for the ride, let alone the kids, the luggage, the bikes, all that sort of stuff. In fact, even if you're not towing anything, you're gonna have to be really careful not to exceed the Tank's GVM if you're packing for a decent holiday. The Tank is very safe though, with a 5-star ANCAP rating and all the active safety gear. Though we'll come back to this in a moment when we get behind the wheel. The Prado has also been updated over its lifespan, so despite its age, it has a full suite of safety gear and surround view cameras, though they're not quite as flash as those in the GWM. Okay, so the Tank stacks up pretty well as a static display, but what about on the road? We shall find out, but first, let's have a go in the Prado. I'll start on the road and then we can go adventuring and see how both cars stack up in a variety of environments. Probably won't be a huge shock to learn that the Prado isn't at its best around town. I mean, it's fine, the engine's pretty good, the ride is generally comfortable. The Kakadu's got air suspension, but it can still get a bit choppy and unsettled on poor surfaces. The steering is slow and quite weighty, so it just makes it a bit ponderous to drive. It's not terrible, it's just that if you need an urban SUV, there are much better choices around. The Tank is better. Petrol engine gives it plenty of go, the steering is lighter and makes it easier to manoeuvre. The ride's very similar, generally pretty good, occasionally a bit busy, but that's just par for the course with this class of car, really. Where the GWM really lets itself down is its safety systems. The fact that it's got all this gear is great, but the lane keep assist in particular is in dire need of recalibration. If you've got the active cruise on with the lane keep assist, it's like going bowling with the bumpers on. You go down the road going boing, 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 constantly being thrown from side to side without ever going in a straight line. If you're driving by yourself, it's actually even worse, as the lane keep assist has no idea where you are in the lane, and it keeps constantly and aggressively fighting the steering. It's absolutely awful. It means the system will basically be turned off at the start of every journey. Another thing is that the cruise controls are basically perfectly hidden behind this steering wheel spoke. I actually drove along for quite a while wondering where they were. I thought they were hidden, but they are actually down here. Anyway, let's now head to somewhere where there aren't any lanes to worry about. This is what the Prado is built for. It feels completely at home in this sort of terrain. If you're going to be doing a lot of this sort of driving, it probably wouldn't hurt to downgrade the Kakadu's 19-inch rims to the 18s of lower grades, but there's still a decent bit of sidewall there that should keep you out of trouble. One advantage of the Prado is permanent four-wheel drive, so even if it's in the wet, or if you're in a situation where you're going gravel tarmac, you don't have to be constantly flicking switches. There's also a number of drive modes: Comfort, Eco, Normal, Sport, Sport Plus, which I don't know if you'd really bother with them. Maybe Sport if you're towing or in really hilly terrain, just to keep the engine on song. Probably the most impressive feature of the Prado is its unflappability. It remains stable even at speed on this slippery gravel, has great traction out of these tight turns, and remains under control even if you hit quite large potholes or undulations. The Pajero Sport, for instance, can run out of ideas if you hit consecutive lumps and bumps, but no such issues in the Prado. Alright, now let's turn off onto some rougher stuff. Now, as ever, how far a Prado is ultimately going to go is going to be limited by these highway spec tyres, but we do have plenty of toys, and they're all here on the dash, so let's get it all happening. We've got low range, push that in. We've got lock the center diff, lock the rear diff, and we've also got a couple of Kakadu specific features here. So, because of the air suspension, what I can do is lift the ride height, give myself a bit of extra ground clearance, and there's also this 5-speed crawl control. So we hit crawl, and using this knob on the dash, I can then control the vehicle speed. So, knock it down one. I mean, it's basically hill descent control, but it does work very, very well. The one downside is, it sounds pretty awful when it's under operation. You can slow it down or just knock it up slightly. As mentioned, it sounds pretty awful when it's doing its thing, but it's a very handy feature to just limit the vehicle speed even on this pretty slippery descent. Now, I've also got exterior cameras here to see what's around the car at low speed. I've got one down right on the front and one on either side, as well as an inclinometer. It's a hard word to say. Shows me the pitch and roll of the vehicle just to make sure everything's under control. It is pretty impressive what the Prado is capable of, even on these very unsuitable tyres. I mean, nothing I'm attempting here is particularly challenging, but it's not even breaking a sweat. Like, it's a pretty steep climb here and it's not even breaking into wheel spin. Right, impressive by the Prado, but let's see how the Tank handles it. Starting on the unsealed road, the Tank isn't too bad, though there are a couple of things. First is that the default mode is rear-wheel drive, but to be honest, that's okay. You can always knock it into 4 high if you're at all concerned, but just remember to knock it back to rear-wheel drive if you hit the tarmac. Second thing is that it's not as composed on rougher surfaces, at least compared to the Prado. You can get some nasty impact strikes on larger potholes, and if the road's kind of chopped up, it can occasionally need a bit of gathering. It's nothing too untoward, but equally, if you're on a long stretch of road in these conditions, having to sort of chase the steering constantly for hours on end could get quite tiring. Now, you might think that in the rougher stuff is where the Tank will be caught out, but that's not the case. Those short front and rear overhangs give it awesome approach and especially departure angles. While 224mm of ground clearance isn't amazing, it's pretty much the same as the Prado. I've also got so many toys in here. Obviously I've got low range and a rear diff lock, but because this is the Ultra, I've also got a front diff lock and 5 drive modes for low range. I've got sort of normal, sand and mud, I've got rock, mountain, and I've also got tank turn, which I'll show you in a moment, but let's start with hill descent control. So, just press that, and then we can set the speed using the cruise control. So it's super slow, but let's just nudge it up a couple. And that all works pretty well. And it's a lot quieter than the Prado as well. Because the Prado was going, this is holding the speed really nicely and very silently. All right, so now down the bottom here, I've got this really sharp turn to the left. So let's engage tank turn. I've got to turn the diff locks off. Tank turn. And what it does is basically grabs the inside rear wheel to pull the front around and reduce the turning circle. So here we go. There we go. The car's actually pivoting around. That works incredibly well. That's amazing. It's actually a really cool feature. So now we've got this little climb here. If there is one weakness with the tank, it's that it doesn't have a lot of traction if you don't have the lockers on. Can we get up? There we go, that's in 4 low, but it's going absolutely nowhere. Still, that's why I've got the lockers for, and realistically, if you came across something like this, you'd have them on anyway. One of the best and first bits of off-roading advice I ever got was that if you've got the toys, use them. Don't wait till you're in trouble. So now, diff lock's in. There we go, absolutely just walks up, no problem. Again, like the Prado, this thing is going to be ultimately limited by its tyres, and these are just highway spec Michelin premises, but it's also got plenty of good hardware. One final thing to mention is that although the tank is petrol, it makes peak torque from just 1800 RPM, so you don't have to give it a heap of revs to get it moving. I'll say that this thing is very impressive. With a proper set of tyres and maybe a bit of a lift, it would be pretty damn capable. From the outset, the point of this exercise wasn't necessarily a direct comparison. The Prado is way more expensive and there's a brand new one around the corner that'll no doubt be better in every way. We wanted to find out if the tank had real substance, and there was no better way to do that than by putting it up against the off-road SUV that almost 200,000 Australians have bought in the last decade. And the answer is yes, it does have substance. There are a couple of creases to iron out. The safety systems badly need recalibration, and a GVM upgrade is required stat if it's going to be a proper choice for adventurers. But it drives well on-road, is very capable off-road, and has a staggering amount of features for the money. It's the most convincing product we've seen so far from GWM Haval, and the rate of improvement suggests that this is just the beginning. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this comparison, please give the video a like, subscribe to the Car Sales channel, and give us a comment down below with any cars you want to see us review.